Hi, everybody. Welcome to your lesson on 2.1 on interactions of environment and heredity. The first couple of slides are learning targets that will go over what we're going to be learning in 2.1. And we're going to be going over behavior genetics, predicting individual differences. And we're going to also be going over evolutionary psychology, so understanding human nature. So we're going to start off with talking about how does heredity differ from environment. So at the very beginning of the school year, we talked a little bit about nature and nurture. So nature is that heredity, the genetic transfer of characteristics from parent to offspring, whereas environment refers to nurture. So that's all the non-genetic influence from prenatal nutrition to the people and things around us. So what do behavior geneticists study? Behavior geneticists, that's a hard word, woo! Behavior geneticists study the relative power and limits of heredity and environmental influences on behavior. So the nurture of nature, so what comes built in and what is nurtured and how. So the power and limits of heredity and environmental influences and all of that on behavior. So we're going to get into a little bit of detail before we go deeper, and we need to know some specifics. What's a chromosome? Well, this is review from 7th grade science, a little bit of 8th grade, and those of you who are in biology or who have taken biology, you will know a chromosome is a thread-like structure made of DNA molecules that contain the genes. So each person has 46 chromosomes. You inherit 23 from your mother and 23 from your father. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is a complex molecule containing the genetic information that makes up the chromosomes. And genes are the biochemical units of heredity that make up the chromosomes. So segments of DNA capable of synthesizing proteins. We all have about 20,000 genes. The human genome is the complete instructions for making a human organism. It consists of all the genetic material in the human's chromosomes, and researchers have discovered a common sequence within the human DNA. This shared genetic profile is what makes us humans rather than tulips or bananas or chimpanzees. It's a very specific genetic profile that makes us humans. So how do monozygotic twins develop? So before we get in, the prefix mono meaning one. So identical monozygotic twins. What this means is that a single fertilized egg splits in two. So you have one fertilized egg, hence the prefix mono. One fertilized egg splits in two, creating two genetically identical organisms. So you have identical twins when you have a monozygotic fertilized single egg that splits in two. Fraternal dizygotic twins, the prefix di means two. So you have separate fertilized eggs that share a maternal prenatal environment. So they are no more alike than siblings. So you've got two different eggs that are fertilized, two separate eggs that are fertilized. They are just the same age. They were sharing the mom's womb at the same time. So we're going to abbreviate monozygotic and dizygotic by MZ and DZ. So how do MZ and DZ twin studies help us understand nature and nurture? Cool stuff. So a person whose identical twin has autism spectrum disorder has about a 3 in 4 risk of being similarly diagnosed. If the affected twin is fraternal, the co-twin has about a 1 in 3 risk. So ask yourself, is the risk higher or lower with monozygotic compared to dizygotic? So if you look, identical twin has about a 3 in 4 risk. 3 out of 4 risk is about a 75%. So that is mono, whereas the dizygotic, that's the fraternal twin, is a 1 in 3. That's about a 33%. So the higher risk comes with the identical twin, the monozygotic. The next box down, identical twins are much more alike in extroversion, which is outgoingness, and neuroticism, which is emotional instability, than our fraternal twins. So they're much more alike with their outgoingness and their emotional instability than our fraternal twins. So they share a lot more genetic similarities than do fraternal twins. Drinking and driving convictions are 12 times greater among those who have an identical twin than those with a fraternal twin with such a conviction. Why? Again, just like the other examples, it goes back to the sharing of genes. Same egg split in two versus digyzotic, where it was two different eggs. So what do twins reared apart tell us about heredity and environment? So Thomas Bouchard and his colleagues located and studied 74 pairs of identical twins that were raised apart. That's what it means when I say reared apart. They were raised apart. They found similarities of tastes and physical attributes, personality, abilities, attitudes, interests, and even fears, even when they were raised apart. How do adoption studies help us understand nature and nurture? So the stunning finding from studies of hundreds of adoptive families is that apart from identical twins, people who grew up together, whether biologically related or not, do not resemble one another in personality. Two adopted children raised in the same home are no more likely to share personality traits with each other than with the child down the block. So the environment shared by a family's children has virtually no discernible impact on their personalities. What is heritability? The proportion of variation among individuals in a group that we can attribute to genes. So really, how do their genes make individuals different? The heritability of a trait may vary depending on the range of populations and environments studied. So that makes sense, right? You would have different variation in traits depending on what population you studied and what environment they're in. So how do behavior geneticists estimate the heritability of a trait? One, many personality traits are about 40% heritable. Intelligence is about 60% heritable, and height about 90% heritable. We'll go over what that means in just a second. So what does intelligence is about 60% heritable mean and not mean? So what it does mean is genetic influence explains about 66% of the observed variation among people. It doesn't mean that your intelligence is 66% genetic. Okay, so that is something very important to understand. Heritable intelligence does not mean you inherit 66 or so percent of your intelligence from your parents. It does mean that genetic influence explains about 66% of the observed variation among people with regards to intelligence. So, teasing apart the environment. Consider Mark Twain's fictional idea of raising boys in barrels to age 12, feeding them through a hole. If we were to follow his suggestion, the boys would all emerge with lower than normal intelligence scores at age 12. Why? Look at the cartoon there. The quote, the title of my science project is My Little Brother, Nature or Nurture? So, yet, given their equal environments, their test score differences could be explained only by their heredity. Why? Think genes. So, how do similar environments impact heritability? If all schools were of uniform quality, all families equally loving, all neighborhoods equally healthy, then heritability would increase because differences due to environment would decrease. So any difference we notice between two students would be due more to their genes than their environment if this were the case. So what's the difference? We got molecular genetics and molecular behavior genetics. Molecular genetics is the study of the molecular structure and function of genes, whereas molecular behavior genetics is the further study of how the structure and function of genes interacts with our environment. So the only difference is the word behavior in the second one, and that implies interaction with our environment to influence the behavior. Last part of the genetics is epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of environmental influences on gene expression that occur without a DNA change. When we break down that word, epi means above or in addition to. So epigenetics studies how an individual's lifestyle, environment, choices, etc., can directly interact with the genome and how it influences gene expression. So beginning in the womb, life experiences lay down epigenetic marks, often organic methyl molecules that can affect the expression of any gene in the DNA segment they affect. So if you look at this, starting up at the top with the genes, in prenatal, you have drugs, toxins, nutrition, stress, all of those in the prenatal phase can impact or affect the expression of any gene in that DNA segment. Postnatal, so once the baby's born, neglect, abuse, variations in care. Juvenile, once it's a child and being raised. Social contact, environmental complexity. And as adults, cognitive challenges, exercise, and nutrition all impact how expressions of our genes show up. So some examples of epigenetics and research. Researchers have found that the effects of childhood trauma, poverty, or malnutrition may last a lifetime. Conceivably, your health and well-being could be affected by stresses or pollutants that your parent or even grandparent experienced. And researchers question why only one member of an identical twin pair may develop a genetically influenced mental disorder. So that all brings us to evolutionary psychology and how they use natural selection to explain behavior. We did talk a little bit about this in the first lesson in Unit 1, so I'm going to go, it's a little bit of review. So we got Darwin, good old Darwin. Darwin's principles of natural selection guide evolutionary psychologists in understanding what makes humans so much alike. So again, to review natural selection, it's the principle that inherited traits that better enable an organism to survive and reproduce in a particular environment will, in competition with other traits, most likely be passed on. So survival of the fittest. This is definitely review from 8th grade. And again, you're going to get this again in biology, or if you already had biology, you know what this is, or if you've taken AP environmental science. A mutation is a random error in a gene replication that leads to a change. So Darwin's basic principles are that organisms' varied offspring compete for survival. Certain biological and behavioral variations increase organism survival chances in their particular environment. So we know they're going to compete. And then there's different biological and behavioral variations that increase their chances of survival when they are competing. And then the organism that survive, or the offspring that survive, are more likely to pass their genes to the next generation. So over time, population characteristics may change. So here's an example. How do foxes factor into this? Researchers Believ and Trout selectively bred the tamest foxes, and after 30 generations, which is 40 years, were able to produce docile, eager to please domesticated animals. So psychological traits can be selected as well as physical traits, which is pretty cool. What about naturally occurring selection? So our historical genes give us a great capacity to learn and to adapt to life in varied environments, from the tundra to the jungle. Genes and experience together wire our brains, and our adaptive flexibility in responding to different environments contributes to our fitness, our ability to survive and reproduce. So I said survival of the fittest. That's what that means. Our adaptive flexibility in responding to different environments so that we can survive and reproduce. So how do evolutionary psychologists believe, or what do they believe about male-female sexuality differences? They believe is in regards to males that males may be more likely to initiate sexual activity, and males may perceive women's friendliness for sexual interest. They also believe in regards to females that tendency toward tall men with slim waists and broad shoulders, and that females may prefer men who are mature, dominant, and bold. This is all theories about what evolutionary psychologists believe. So what are social scripts? A social script is a culturally modeled guide for how to act in various situations. We've all got them. We have them that tell us how to go out to eat in a restaurant, enter, take a seat, read a menu, order, eat, pay the bill, leave. Social scripts give indications of how men and women, elderly and young, might act in society. Criticisms of the evolutionary perspective on sexuality is that it starts with the effect and works backwards to explain what happened, tries to explain today's behavior with decisions that were made thousands of years ago, and there are social consequences to accepting evolutionary explanations. How do evolutionary psychologists respond to this criticism? Much of who we are is not hardwired. Genes are not destiny. That's what they believe. Men and women are far more alike than different. And some traits and behaviors are hard to explain in terms of natural selection. The last part of this lesson is what is the biopsychosocial approach to development? This is also a review from the first unit. The biopsychosocial, break it down into 3 parts. Bio meaning genes, psycho meaning environment, and social meaning culture. Biopsychosocial. So genes, environment, and our culture all combine to influence our development.